Compliance with Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, entitled Open Public Meetings Act. Adequate notice of this board meeting has been provided as specified in the Act. Proper notice of this public meeting was provided in a notice of January 7, 2019. Said notice was posted at the entrance of the Board of Education offices, mailed to the Nutley Township Clerk, advertised in the Nutley Sun and Star Ledger on January 17, 2019, posted on the district website. This is an official meeting. And can we... Let's all rise for the flag salute, please. Roll call, Mr. Kuzma.
Here. Here.
Mr. Riley? Here. Mr. Scalera? Here. Ms. Sarah?
Here.
Mr. Marcel?
Here.
Whereas the Board of Education will be discussing matters exempt from public discussion pursuant to NJSA 10:4-12, now therefore be it resolved the Board of Education recess to close executive session at this time for attorney-client privilege. We estimate this to be about 10 minutes, 15 at the most, so we'll be back with you shortly. Can we have a motion to go into closed executive, please?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor? We'll be right back.
Hey, back here.
Mr. Momora, can we have a roll call, please? We are now back in open session.
Mrs. Stanchek Martin,
Here.
Mr. DeMayo, Mr. Ferraro, Mr. Kaczynski, Mrs. Quirk,
Here.
Mr. Riley, Mr. Scalera,
Here.
Ms. Zarrow,
Here.
Mr. Carnicella.
Here. Can we have a motion for the inclusion of the two board members, Mr. DeMayo and Mr. Kaczynski, to be allowed to participate in the meeting this evening by speakerphone? Is somebody going to make a motion? I can make the motion. All right, I'm making the motion to include Mr. DeMayo and Mr. Kaczynski on speakerphone to participate in this meeting. Can we have a roll call?
No,
Oh,
second.
sorry, we need a second.
Second.
Discussion?
How do you propose that this is handled? Like, so that, because the public has to be able to hear them, and how are we going to do that?
At this point, when we do have them come on, our goal is that everyone's going to be able to hear both of the board members on speaker. If the clarity is not appropriate, we will move forward with the meeting without them. But at this point, if the board, as a majority, is willing to work on attempting this and seeing if it will work, from what I know, it has worked in the past, so we're going to try to give this around if the majority of the board is willing to do that. So we'll take any further discussion.
I just want to put it on the record that, and I'll vote no when my vote comes around, but again, as I've said before, there's no policy that guides us or directs us to be able to do that. I was told earlier today that it happened once in 2011, but past practice tells me that it's never happened before, and anybody who's ever asked to do it has not been allowed to do it, so I just wanted on record that there's no policy or no bylaws that direct requires us to do this.
Mr. Zitterer, I was going to ask, would you be able to elaborate on kind of how this came together for us to inquire about the legality of us having a speakerphone vote?
Just want to make sure it was working. I was asked to provide a legal opinion about whether the Open Public Meetings Act allows board members to participate in board meetings by speakerphone. I provided the board with a legal opinion, a confidential legal opinion citing relevant case law as well as an attorney general's opinion. And it is my opinion based on reading the actual definition of what a meeting is under the statute, which includes meetings by electronic means, as well as taking direction from the case law, and again, the Attorney General's opinion that it is my view that the Board of Education can allow a member or two to participate in a meeting by speakerphone, so long as the community can hear the members on the phone and vice versa, and that we announce at the beginning of the meeting, as we have done, that we wish to have board members participate by speakerphone. I've also advised the board that going forward, if you'd like to do this on an ongoing basis as the need arises, that I strongly recommend that we adopt and develop a policy, which I'm happy to assist you with.
Thank you, Mrs. Zitterer. Any further discussion?
Yes, and just since council brought it up, just for the record, he sent us an email referring to 2 cases, one which was approved and one which was rejected by a judge. So we have conflicting information to move forward on this. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
My biggest concern is how are we keeping the connectivity? And I'm just going to ask, are we doing like Skype? Because I see Karen's computer is plugged in. It's not really by cell phone. They're going to call in and do it by Skype over her computer. Is that what I'm understanding? Google Meet. So it's not really cell phone. The cell phone is going to come into the connection, should be plugged into the speaker, so everybody should be able to hear it.
You're going to hear, it's going to, all the volume is coming through this laptop.
But out to the,
That microphone.
oh, with the microphone. Okay.
Any further discussion?
Yes, and the audience, I know can hear them, they'll be able to hear the audience, correct?
That's the plan.
That's the plan. Gotcha.
And if that, and as I said earlier, if that is not the case, we're going to ask some of the people at the back of the room there, as well as our recording team up on the second floor. If something is not clear or well understood, just raise a hand, let us know, so that we can disconnect and just continue with the meeting if this is not going to work. Okay? Any further discussion?
Yeah, Mr. President, I'm sorry, I may not have heard the rest. That's because you said, but
Can't hear her.
Oh, sure, hold on.
It's turned on. Turn it back on.
I will. I want to make sure we don't have
Mr. President, if the connectivity is disconnected at that point, are they no longer part of the meeting?
At that point, I'm going to refer it over to Mr. Zitterer, who's our legal advisor. So if they get
would not be part
disconnected.
of the meeting as far as I'm concerned at that point.
If you lose them once, they're done. What he's clarifying is if they bring them on,
We can't hear her.
I'm going to clarify it for you. I know, Karen. So what he said was that once they're connected, if they lose the connection once, then they're permanently out of the meeting. We don't bring them back. That's what they're clarifying.
And does the meeting end at that point?
The meeting would not end because we still have a quorum.
Better know it.
Anyone else? Roll call, Mr. Memar.
Mrs. Dan Martin?
According to past precedents, the opinion of our attorney and also the opinion of New Jersey school boards, which I contacted, and they were of the opinion that this was fine to have voting, I vote yes.
Mr. DeMayo? Mr. Ferraro?
Yes.
Mr. Kaczynski? Mrs. Quirk?
No.
Mr. Riley?
And based on my conversation with the school board's attorney, who said to me that you're guided by your policy, which does not exist, I'm voting no.
Mr. Sclera?
So guided by our attorney's ruling, as long as the technology is clear and the technology works, we have no problem with this.
Mrs. Arrow?
As long as the technology works, I have no problem with it, yes.
Mr. Carnicella?
Yes. We will move forward with the connection of Mr. DeMayo and Mr. Kaczynski. What do we need to do that? Mr. Kaczynski, are you available? Can you hear us? Frank DeMayo?
Mr. President, I'll take one.
I'll just make this red for Charlie. Charlie, make sure your phone is not muted. I can see you on our end. How about now? Yes. Can you hear us, Frank? Frank? We're just checking the volume levels to see if we have clarity on our. Oh, that's better. Charlie, are you there? Okay, so just give us a second here. I'm going to ask everyone, and as well as our recording team up on the second level, how was that as far as volume goes and clarity?
Volume, clarity,
Very disturbed.
volume is good, clarity is bad.
What is that? Is it bad? Mr. President,
We're going to play. No, it's not. We need our recording team is telling us that it's not. The problem is that we have distortion. This is going to be a problem. All right, Frank, Charlie, we are definitely having clarity issues here on our side.
as a board, we made a decision that the clarity was not appropriate for the public and for our recording, that we were going to unfortunately have you terminated from the meeting. So with that in mind, we thank you for the opportunity to try to sit in on this meeting. But right now, the technology is not supporting what we need to accomplish. So I'm going to ask you, thank you, but we're going to move on to the meeting. And I absolutely have no problem with briefing both of you at the completion of the meeting.
I don't know, Mr. President, I'll just break the connection.
Yeah, just each other.
Thank you.
Charlie's all. Okay, we need an approval of the minutes, please.
Motion.
All in favor? All right, any correspondence for this evening? Okay, we're going to start our first presentation this evening from Mr. John Simcoe on the restoration of the John Walker Middle School murals. Okay, so we're going to bring down the projection screen, so I'm going to ask the board to just go in the audience.
Hello, everyone. Am I coming through enough to be heard? All right, so my name is John Simcoe. I'm here with two different hats on. I'm here as a board member of the Nutley Historical Society, and I'm also the director of the Nutley Museum. A couple of years ago, I came into this school for some unrelated business and noticed the really beautiful murals that are on the 3 floors of the main hallway of the school. At that point, we could tell that they were starting to deteriorate. I fast forwarded to 50 years from now, when they would be deteriorated so badly that they would either be removed or painted over, and people would not really be able to enjoy them anymore. So I just want to let you know about the efforts of the Nutley Historical Society to preserve and restore these murals. The first slide that I'm showing you is from a 1934 Nutley Sun newspaper article that shows 4 of the 5 students who designed and painted the niches in the hallways. Everyone aware of these murals that are in the halls? If not, when you go out and look either to the left or the right where the water fountains are, you will see them above the locker room level. So these were painted by the students when this building was Nutley High School in 1934. The building opened in 1926. These students decided to take on that task of decorating their schools. So here you see one of the murals just in its sort of sketch form. And I'm going to show you what that mural looked like about 2 years ago. You can see that one of the pieces, these are, by the way, painted on canvas and then glued up into these niches. One of them had begun coming away from the wall. You can also see along the tree to the left that there's a loss of paint, and so they were not in very good shape. By the time we got around to actually doing something about this, this was the shape of that mural. So that piece had come down and pulled some more with it, and the danger was that the whole left side was going to come down. We actually found a piece laying on the floor. So I took on the task of getting some private donors, of finding an art restorer to come in to restore the murals. And after taking a look at this, examining it, my restorer wound up removing everything that was about to fall off, took it back to her studio, which is in Passaic, New Jersey, restored all of those pieces, and then sort of painstakingly put them back together, glued them back up on the wall. In addition, what she did was removed 85 years. These are now, the first one, 1934, is 85 years ago. Removed not only the dirt and the grime, the pencil, very gentle graffiti, but the pencil graffiti that kids had added to this over the years, and also varnish that had begun to turn gray and yellow. And this is the mural as it looks today. As of about maybe 4 months ago, this first one was completed. I'm going to show you 3 of the 5 murals. This is a mural that is called, by the way, the student, William Clem, who painted that, had to leave high school before he graduated to go join his family's business. They were poor enough that they needed him in their family business. So he was one of the students who did not graduate from the Nutley school system. This gentleman's name was Harry McDougall, and he painted a mural, probably the most ambitious of all of them, that is called Today. You see a shipyard in the left, pizza-shaped piece, construction going on in New York City. Again, remember this one is 1934. You can see the Chrysler building being built to the back, and then sort of the aeronautics industry off on the right end. This is what this mural looks like today. So beautifully clean, all of the old varnish taken off and some in-painting done. Interestingly enough, what I found out about Mr. McDougall is that once he graduated from high school, he goes on to serve very admirably in the U.S. Navy. He was actually on the first submarine after the attack on Pearl Harbor to enter Japanese waters in the Pacific Theater and made the first confirmed kill of an enemy ship. What I found very interesting was that upon retirement, he moves up to Portland, Maine, and he works until he retires in 1975 as a designer of fire prevention systems at a naval shipyard. So here, 1/3 of his mural is about the naval shipyard industry, and whether he knew it or not, that would be his profession going forward. So this one is beautifully restored. The one that was probably in the worst shape was this, up on the 3rd floor. What my restorer thinks is that this one got the biggest hit of coal dust over the decades, when that's the way the school was heated. The artist for this, some of you may know her name, is Vivian Ficus. Vivian Noyes at the time. She goes on to become Vivian Ficus. She opened an art school for many years on Franklin Avenue in Nutley. She also was the president of the Miniaturist Society of Portraiture, so a successful painter in her own right. She illustrated Anne Fleury's 1960 history of Nutley, Nutley Yesterday and Today. And then probably most famously in the 50s went on to design Nutley's town flag that you can see hanging in Town Hall today. So this, which people could hardly make out what was going on this, and by the way, this is my art restorer Velo, and you can see behind her is the half-clean mural. And you can just see the dirt on the right-hand side and how it's becoming clean on the left. This is what that mural looks like today. So again, a beautiful underwater scene. We've got Nemo over on the right-hand side. I've got a smiling crab, a great octopus. And so a really beautiful restoration work here. This is just, I was very surprised that you can see that you can make out the diver's face in this detail. And I leave that one with this very sort of cute fish at the end. So the other thing that happened when I came in was that I noticed that there are 6 niches, and these kids only filled 5 of them. This is back in 2016. The wheels turn slowly, but what I had decided to do at that point was to fill that final niche 80 years later. I held an art competition between Nutley High School and middle school students, since this was a high school and is now a middle school. 17 students participated. This is, by the way, is that empty niche. 17 students participated in that. I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 of the half-size maquettes. So a study. The niches are 6 feet wide. These studies are 3 feet wide. This is 1. This is 2. I've got 17 of these, and I've got about a dozen of them on display at the Nutley Museum. The subject that I gave to the students was the Nutley Amateur Circus, which was this tremendous charitable event that was held in 1894, starring Nutley's own Annie Oakley, who you see on the left, and Henry Bunner, who was elected to the Nutley Hall of Fame in 2017 as a New York poet, editor, short story writer. They got together, you see the Red Cross on there, to get fundraising. It was a one-day event, afternoon for children, evening for adults, to get money to start a Red Cross chapter in Nutley. So we thought that that was very appropriate. subject matter for it. So I just wanted to show you those three. I will tease you with the empty niche again because, and I will invite people, and you need to RSVP to be able to attend the event. But on Wednesday, April 24th, we are going to have an unveiling on the stage of the mural that is now sitting in my museum. Will be unveiled here, and later on will wind up being installed in that empty niche upstairs. That night also, I'm going to be training some middle school and Nutley school, middle school and high school students to act as docents. So when people arrive that night from 6:30 to 7, they'll be taken on guided tours to go visit those 5 murals. To see the restoration work. We will gather here at 7 o'clock for some refreshments and for the unveiling of that mural. So that's sort of to the public, to the board. I put on my hat as the chair of the Nutley Historic Preservation Committee. We have recently begun to populate our list with buildings in town that will be protected. And they range from a mansion that is on Highfield Lane, a converted barn that is on Warren Street, and an old building that is nothing to look at, but that served as the Essex Film Club for over 30 years. We're not limited to structures, we are limited to important objects in town. And I want to propose to the board, and I will come back for another meeting to have a fuller and maybe a more intimate discussion with you guys about placing these murals, and also the 2 that are here, on a landmark list. One of the comments made to me when I started this was that in 2002, I'm not quite sure that I've got the year right, that someone had to basically stop people from painting over these. So I want to make sure that that sort of never happens, and that 80 years from now people could still see these. And I think if we could landmark them, they would wind up being in the school certainly as long as this building exists. So that's what I'm here to share with you. If there are any questions, I'd love to take them. If not, yes.
Is it still a school that has the murals, or are there other schools, like elementary schools, that have similar murals?
Okay, so the question is whether other schools have murals as well. Nutley's got a tremendous history of murals. We've got a great one in the library that celebrates Frank Stockton, one of our Hall of Fame writers. There, of course, everyone knows the Annie Oakley mural in our post office. But getting to the schools, the only other school that I know that has got murals that I'm interested in, so murals that are at any capacity that look like these, is Lincoln School. And there are murals on either side, and those were actually painted by middle school students in 1941. Absolutely beautiful. They've got a great story behind them. So one of my goals is, and by the way, I did this all with private funding. Now I'm down Nutley residents, and if you come to that meeting, you will meet them. I'm going to introduce them to you. One of them, by the way, is Ruth Bedford, who the night before our meeting next month will turn 101. Ruth graduated from this school in 1936 when the last mural was painted. So my intentions is going to do some fundraising to get these 2 murals cleaned and restored. My art restorer is very excited to take those on. And then I would love to go into Lincoln School. Those are the only other 2 murals that have figures in them that I'm aware of. Okay? Any other questions? Great. Thanks for listening.
Yes, yeah. We have to presentation.
Mr. Sinfield, thank you so much. Looking forward to our continued work with you. This is just wonderful. I know it's a little bit more informal down here. We usually give everyone an opportunity to speak, but if anyone wants to make a comment, we'll go back up there. We'll be sure to do that. The next one up is Mr. Capella, who I am certain this is your monthly biannual report, correct?
Thank you. So yes, this is the biannual report. You have the pleasure of seeing me.
Use the microphone.
You have the pleasure of seeing me in November, March, and in July. So for those who do not know me, my name is Joe Capella. I'm the Student Assistance Coordinator for the school district. And part of the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights is that Dr. Glazer and I have to conduct a presentation twice a year regarding H.I.B incidents. This report that I'll be presenting tonight is in regards to incidents which occurred between September and December. Before we go into that, I just want to give a brief refresher regarding the H.I.B law and what is considered H.I.B harassment, intimidation, and bullying according to New Jersey law. First, the incident has to be motivated by one's either an actual or perceived characteristic of the student. The Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights does provide us with a list of protected characteristics, or it could be any other distinguishing characteristic. Here are a list of the protected characteristics, and as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, there are any other distinguishing characteristic of a student: height, weight, they wear glasses. In addition to that, the second component it has is the location, taking place on school property, at any school-sponsored function, either at a sporting event, on a field trip, on a school bus, or off school grounds. However, for it to be considered HIB off school grounds, there has to be disruption, interference with the operation of the school, or the rights of other students. Third component is the impact, the effect on the student. Does it physically, emotionally harm them? Placing the student in reasonable fear of physical, emotional harm or damaging property. Resulting in demeaning, or it creates a hostile educational environment for the student, or maybe the student does not feel safe coming to school or being in a particular classroom. When our anti-bullying specialists conduct an investigation, they have to make a determination of the incident. So it could be one of three, where it did not meet the criteria for it to be considered an H.I.B incident, or it did not meet the criteria for a code of conduct violation. That's a non-HIB event. Or it could be a HIB event where it meets the criteria of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. Or the third could be it doesn't meet the criteria for H.I.B, however, it is a code of conduct violation. Here are the anti-bullying specialists and also the investigators. We have Ms. Alfaro, who works at Yantacaw and serves students at Radcliffe as well, and Mrs. Tennell is at Lincoln School and Spring Garden. So as a district, we had 39 cases that were investigated. To the right, you can see it's a breakdown according to each school. Lincoln at 8, Radcliffe 4, Spring Garden 5, Washington 1. Yantacaw had 3 investigations, the middle school at 4, and Nutley High School at 6. Breaking them down according to the elementary level, you see there's 3 charts here. The blue represents the number of investigations. The red represents the number of confirmed HIBs, and the green represents non-HIBs. Those cases, the 7 cases at the elementary level that were considered H.I.B, this is the breakdown of what was the motivating characteristic of each event. So at Lincoln was based upon one student's disability. The 2 cases were based upon sexual orientation and another distinguishing characteristic. As long as Spring Garden, the one incident at Washington School was not deemed an H.I.B incident. Yantacaw had 3 cases. And they were based upon race, national origin, sexual orientation, and other. You could have one incident which could have been motivated by more than one characteristic. At the high school, 4, and 1 was considered HIB, 3 were considered code of conduct. I'm sorry, that's at the middle school, I apologize. 6 investigations at the high school, 4 were considered HIB, and 1 was considered a non-HIB. And 1 was also considered code of conduct at the high school. In the 1 case that was considered H.I.B at John Walker Middle School, it was targeting one's religion, where with the 4 cases, 1 was on gender, and 3 were other distinguishing characteristics. A brief snapshot. Whenever there is an incident of H.I.B, there are remedial measures. Here's examples. Loss of privilege. Maybe the student's not allowed to participate in an event, not allowed to go out for lunch. There could be some type of discipline, warnings, support services, school-based counseling, either through the school counseling department or the special services department, different type of assignments, reflection assignments that a student may have to conduct, or different miscellaneous interventions, remedial measures, parent contact, parent conferences, blocker changes, modest staff monitoring, classroom lessons, and contacting and reported contacting the Nutley Police Department. District-wide, I'm responsible for training all of our district staff. I think as of right now, we have one left. Beginning of the year, all the staff members in the district attended a youth suicide prevention program. It's mandated as per the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights, 2-hour training. Our district also had an articulation day, which focused on social skills, assisting students manage their emotions. I meet with the anti-bullying specialist, conducting student trainings throughout the course of those 4 months. It's constantly ongoing. I met with the administrative team. There were revisions to the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights, which went into effect July 1st, 2018. I'm also a member of the Anti-Bullying Coordinators Association. Throughout the year, we're always through our website, through Ms. Greco, through social media websites, posting the positive accomplishments of students and staff. There is resources on the district homepage. There's an HIV link and a quick link section to the left. Other prevention activities, like I said, student HIV trainings, the elementary character education program. Lead is in the classroom, the police department to the 6th grade. The high school has an advisory period twice a month. High school athletic department conducts, as part of their requirement, is to conduct community service projects, classroom lessons infused into the curriculum, various clubs, assemblies, fundraisers, theme days, not focus on anti-bullying, but building character in our students, our student body. Also part of the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights is to conduct a week of respect the first weekend of October. District-wide, we have a Blue Shirt Day, Stomp Out Bullying, the elementary level, 2 different groups, conducted different activities. The middle school, we had an advisory lesson. At the high school, there was the incident where the auditorium, this facility, they usually conduct presentations. They were unable to do that, so hopefully they're either rescheduled. They did have theme days, which I believe I just want to correct that was done in December, and they're constantly providing respect quotes throughout the school. This past July, I conducted a presentation to the board that's required to conduct a self-assessment. The state has yet to provide us with our Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights self-assessment from 2017-2018 school year. Once we receive that, they have to be posted on the district website within 10 school days. We're just waiting on that. Thank you.
Mr. Capello, thank you so much. I just wanted to confirm what was coming up next, so I thank you again. I'll see you next month.
All right, next up, we're going to be doing the 2019-2020 preliminary budget. This is going to be presented by our board administrator, Karen Yeamans, as well as our superintendent of schools, Dr. Julie Glazer.
Thank you, Mr. Carnicella. So we'd like to begin this presentation with talking a little bit about the budget process, what we go through, what we're looking at, when we start, going through the entire calendar and timeline to get us to this evening. So, what is the budget? It's the financial expression of the district's educational goals translating the educational visions and needs of the community into the dollars. This chart here will give you an idea of the budget flow process. So we start with the district change of command input from teachers, principals, supervisors, the chief school administrator, myself. The board sets parameters, all of our directors and the entire administrative team. We begin our process very early, which you'll see when we look at the calendar. From there, we arrive at tonight's board tentative approval of the budget, where the board is going to set the general fund budget for next year, as well as the tax levy for next year. This budget then needs to be presented to the Executive County Superintendent's Office no later than Wednesday morning, along with all the supporting documents. What we present to the county is an 88-page document. There are sub-sheets to every one of the master sheets, and everything needs to tie back to the overall revenues, the overall appropriations. So there is a lot of detail and a lot of additional information that goes into submitting this. Along with that, they have other supporting documents that they request, such as a listing of every employee of the district. Every employee has what's called a position control roster number, which is associated with their function in the district, as well as salaries. And those totals have to tie into the salary lines in each and every budgeted line item. And there is a salary budget line item for almost every category. So for instance, kindergarten teachers have a budget line, and grades 1 to 5 have one, and grades 6 to 8, 9 to 12, and each and every one of our special ed programs have their own budget lines. On and on, all the way through to non-instructional aides, bus drivers, et cetera, et cetera. Can we just go back to that, please? The Executive County Superintendent will then review, make sure that the budget is in compliance with all of the state requirements, and eventually send us a letter saying that the budget has received approval. We then will send that out to the newspaper to be advertised, and ultimately then have a community presentation on the final budget, which will be on May 6th, where the board will be adopting that final number. The number we set tonight, we cannot exceed the number, but the number can be reduced as we find additional cost savings, or we receive final contract renewal amounts from various vendors that we deal with. Next. Thank you. So where does the board sit in this process? The board is responsible to set the priorities, what we must fund, the district goals, things we need to achieve student achievement, and what the community can afford. The budget calendar monitors our progress towards meeting all the deadlines. Communicating to the community is very important as we begin this evening with this presentation. And then the board does the oversight to ensure that the final budget is supporting student achievement and standards. So what is the board's role during the budget process? You can go through and check off every single one of those letters from A through E. They help to set the priorities, develop the budget, communicate the budget, and ensure that it is supporting student achievement. And here is our budget calendar, which guides the administrative team as well as the board through the process. And you can see, going all the way back to July of last year, when we developed this calendar and reviewed it with the board at the retreat. The final column shows who has the responsibility at each step throughout the process. In August, we begin to review budget forms and deadlines with the administrators at their retreat. And then each and every month, there are steps throughout the process that need to be met. So we are constantly reviewing the previous year's budget, the current year's budget, and what we are going to need to move forward. We, as a cabinet, we meet every single Monday throughout the year. And this is on our agenda each and every week as part of our meetings. We begin to update the allocations and the budget forms and instructions for the entire administrative team in October, and then give them a deadline in November as to when they need to submit their budget requests for the following year. This is done by every building principal and every subject coordinator and director in the district. We then begin to cull the information, to start drafting a tentative budget, get an idea of where we are at, what we are looking for in terms of revenue, what the revenue potential could possibly be, so that we can develop a balanced budget. We start reporting through finance committee meetings each and every step of the way, every single month. And the process continues to happen, looking at staffing, looking at potential new programs, and up until we get to the receipt of the state aid, which this year came a little bit late in March because it doesn't get released until after the governor's budget address. We make any necessary adjustments based upon that state aid figure. We did receive almost $400,000 in additional state aid this year. So that gets factored into the revenue, and we continue to refine all of the requests and all of the needs to determine what we can and cannot accommodate in the budget to arrive at tonight's presentation. We will continue to do this process. This budget just doesn't sit on a desk and collect dust between now and May 6th. We continue to work on it, we continue to refine the numbers, and we continue the process with the board all the way through the evening of May 6th. This pie chart is probably a little difficult to read, but just to give you an idea, the largest part of the pie chart, the purple section, is actually the overall cost of salaries throughout the district. This also includes substitute salaries, overtime, any additional pay such as club assignments, directors of programs, the play director, and things of that nature. So it's complete total salaries for the entire district, which is a little over 61% of the budget. The orange piece of the pie is the other big piece, which is the benefits. That includes all the medical benefits, the cost of workers' comp, Social Security, tuition reimbursement, etc. And that's another 21%. So when you just add those two numbers together, you're over 82% of the budget right there from the get-go before we looked at anything else. Tuition, health, and related services for students who attend out-of-district placements, as well as students that receive additional services in district, is approximately 8%. Teaching and technology supplies, just under 2% of the entire budget. Utilities, about 1.6%, and each and every piece thereof, you can see how the slices of the pie just get smaller and smaller to represent those totals. We have a tentative budget resolution that the board is reviewing this evening, where the general fund, special revenue fund, which is all of the federal aid that we receive, such as ESSA, which was formerly the No Child Left Behind, IDEA funds, which is used for special education, and Perkins, which is used for some of the programs at the high school, come to about 1.66 million. The debt service fund is repayment on the previous referendums that the district has of 3.6. And then setting the general fund tax levy and the debt service tax levy. So at those numbers, the average assessed home presently is $318,343, and that would be an increase of $147.76. And the debt service tax levy on that would be an increase of $11.86. And now I'll turn things over to Dr. Glazer.
So, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, I have the unpopular part of this presentation. You're either going to be unhappy because of the numbers that I tell you that we need to balance and what it took to do that, or you're going to be unhappy at my recommendation for making a budget. Tonight, as Mrs. Yemen said, it's the board's responsibility to set the maximum tax levy. We cannot go above whatever's set tonight with the preliminary budget. And as she also shared with you, we still have April committee meetings and 2 Board of Education meetings to continue to discuss this, to come to the final tax levy, and to continue our discussions as a board to maintain their number 1 priority, which is to support the education and standards for students. Here in Nutley, for a long period of years, I think that every person on the Board of Education, every person in the Township of Nutley has been incredibly mindful of the taxpayer. There have been numerous opportunities to grow the budget, numerous opportunities to add staffing, to add programming, opportunities to go, frankly, above the 2% that the state allows without vote that started in 2010. And I think, to their great credit, the board and previous administrations and all of us over the last couple years have done a tremendous job in creating efficiencies and finding ways to make all of that work over a long period of time. In 2016, right before I came to the district, when the budget was struck, it was made very clear that many of the things that were planned for would not be sustainable without looking at every line of the budget. We changed the process, as you know, to a zero-based budgeting process, a needs-based process. We do prioritize those needs, 1, 2s, 3s, what's absolutely essential to make the program run, what we need to grow our program, what we need to continue to look at the vision that is stated in the strategic plan and the board and district goals. This year, as we developed the budget, we came to the first round, as Mrs. Yemen says, the first round that we come to the Finance Committee. And at 2%, we had well over a $2 million deficit, meaning that we were not able to balance the budget in February at the first round of this budget and began to look at ways to limit that deficit, ways to be able to satisfy the will of the board, the will of the taxpayers, and the needs of our student body and student population. We get that chart? Yeah? No? Okay, that's fine. I'll keep talking until it comes, and then hopefully we'll be able to take a look at that. So what that means is that we take that first round budget and we say, okay, we have a $2,700,000 deficit, which does not include any of the 61, I'll say it again, 61 position requests for new positions, whether that's in special education, teaching, to keep our class sizes low, or any of the other positions. And we go through, and with the original 2% deficit, which was over $3 million, we looked at that additional state aid that Karen mentioned, $399,000. We did get another $4,800 in tuition revenue. We were able to increase our special ed extraordinary aid by about $170,000, increase of SEMI, which is Medicaid revenue for students, or again, special education students, for about $27,000. We had additional interest income and our facility use for our extended day programs, which brought, again, that deficit down to about $2,700,000. Thank you, Ian. We continued with the principals, with the supervisors, with the cabinet, with the board, to go through the budget line by line to try and find additional reductions. And those reductions include things such as charter school tuition students. In our curriculum instruction line, we cut out almost $70,000. That includes curriculum writing, includes the superintendent's advisory council, includes professional learning. We went through and cut the elementary math and language arts supplies, reducing those at the elementary level. All of the elementary subscriptions, Time for Kids, Storyworks, those kinds of things. We also reduced the library supplies, periodicals district-wide. We absorbed technology replacements that would usually happen in every building and district-wide to be able to make this happen. There were requests for different kinds of seating and desks at the middle school and at the high school. Those were eliminated. We reduced the textbook budget overall, but primarily at the high school, as well as office supplies and graduation supplies for the high school and middle school. Athletics went back in, took out another almost 2%, shortening some seasons, taking away some away games and transportation costs. We were able to move 2 new instructional programs to extended days enrichment programs. And we were able to reduce our increase in maintenance, contracted services, and repairs. We were able to reduce substitute costs. And for the teachers in the room who have had to give up their professional development because there were not substitutes available, for those of you that have begged us to come into line with other districts with what we pay our substitute teachers, unfortunately that's not possible. We were able to reduce overtime, maintenance, and custodial costs, our purchase services and special ed, and then we come to some of our personnel costs. We are out of space, as you well know, nothing new there. So what we've done is in areas where we could collapse classrooms and increase class size, we did that. Those collapses represent about 6 positions. We are restructuring central office positions. We're not replacing retirees. We're reducing instructional aid time and looking at lunch duty costs as part of our food service contracts. All of that allowed us to cut more than $1 million and reduce that deficit down to the $1,500,000 that you see in column 1 under the 2%. And that's 2% straight up, no waivers, no other kinds of caps involved. The rest of this chart is based on what's available to us as a district. So I want to make sure we all understand what that is so that when we have the recommendations and we come up with that tax levy number, everybody's well informed about what it is that we're discussing. 3% means that we go up, right? You go up, the deficit comes down about $500,000. That percentage is about $500,000. We'll be required to use the waivers we receive from the difference in insurance, what we pay versus the state insurance. That 3% still leaves us with a deficit of $955,000. At 3%, we would still have to look at additional cuts. And those additional cuts might be anything from staffing, looking at programs, and those programs include our CTE programs, our experiential programs, looking at cutting supplies from our culinary program or lumber from industrial arts, looking at the loss of the technology coach position, perhaps additional cuts from athletics, additional cuts from our fine performing and practical arts and theater and music, looking at our strategic planning resources that we'd set aside, as well as reductions in transportation and further reductions in supplies and technology, including our Chromebooks that you just heard the one-to-one presentation about last week. So those are all of the outcomes at 3% as we stand today. And as Mrs. Yemen says, we are still waiting for contracts. We have not gotten a final health insurance number. We have not received some other vendor contracts that could lower that deficit, but we don't know what those are. And luckily tonight is a preliminary budget. We don't submit a final budget until May, so we do have time to continue to discuss as a group and as a board what the cuts will need to be. At 4%, it leaves a deficit of about $400,000. That's a combination of the insurance waiver plus some of the bank cap that the district has available. Bank cap is when you don't use that insurance waiver over time. It's there for you for a period of 1 to 3 years as pieces of it fall off. We currently have about $1 million available to us in bank cap that will fall off if we don't use it. At 4.725%, using the bank cap and the insurance waiver, there is no deficit. However, I did not recommend to go all the way to the top, and I don't believe that the will of the board or the taxpayers is for us to do that. We're still pursuing, like I said, cuts. We're still pursuing the optimistic and hoped-for outcome that our vendors will come in less and that our health insurance will come in less. My recommendation to the board, so you know, was to come in at 4% using a combination of the health waiver and the bank cap for tonight. And again, I'm going to say for tonight. Tonight is a preliminary budget. It sets the maximum amount of tax levy. And from here we have, as I said, the additional committee meetings and 2 additional board meetings to continue those conversations with the expected outcome, not just the hoped for outcome, the expected outcome that we come in much less than that number and are able to come to a balanced budget that is also in the best interests of our staff, students, and community. At this time, if you have questions for Karen or myself, we'd be happy to try and answer. You done? Yes?
Can you just explain the bank cap?
Sure.
Because in relation to that, maybe there's confusion. Some people may be confused. They think it's free money. It's not free money.
No, it's not. So what bank cap is, and again, it takes us above that 2%, right? We can go to 2% and then there are waivers. And the insurance waiver that we get, like I said, is the difference between our insurance and the state insurance. When we have that available to us and we don't use it, it becomes banked, right? It's kind of like waiting for us to use if we so choose. But that is above the 2%. I don't know if you want to say anything else about it or how it falls off.
No, that's exactly how we have come to the number that this district has in terms of bank cap. It's from not using the health waivers in the past. So that money builds, and it lasts for, each one lasts for 2 years, and then you lose that credit.
It builds in addition to the 2%, so
Yes.
it's going above the 2%.
It is to go above the 2%,
But
yes.
you don't have to vote.
Right, which still affects the taxpayer.
Yes, it
For an
does.
additional amount.
Yes, it increases the tax levy above the 2%.
So if you look at the chart, you can see in the different percentages where the tax levy goes up. And it goes up because we've gone above the 2%. We tried to give the assessed value of the average home and all the way up to a home valued at $500,000, just so people could get a sense for their own selves. The 2% tax levy is at $208 on a $500,000 home. The 4% is $293 on the $500,000 home, about $88. You good?
Yeah, I'll come back.
All right, Roy, Mr. Moore, sorry.
I have a two-part question. Does this include the settlement for the teachers' salary increase?
So we're still negotiating with the teachers. The next mediation is April 9th, I believe. There is nothing that still is yet decided, so we have to budget based upon those discussions. They're not, I believe it or not, I don't even know what that number is. However, if you look at just growth of a budget, you can see that at 2%, what that leaves us in deficit, at 3%, what that leaves us at deficit in 4%.
So this becomes moot.
No, we don't have a choice. So again, tonight, whatever we said is the maximum tax levy, and May 6th, we vote, May 8th, it has to be submitted. That is our budget, period. That's it.
Well, Tom Evans just was at the budget workshop for the municipality. They're 5% right now. So you're looking at possibly 4%. So
I recommended 4, that doesn't mean that we're looking at it. Just to be clear, you'll have to wait for the board discussion and the board.
You have no thought on what the teacher's settlement could be.
Well, again, it's not something that I am at the table to discuss. I'm not able to discuss that. We also have board members that are not able to discuss it.
Then what about the additional apartments that they're going to be putting up? If you're claiming, is there any proportion in the budget now to accommodate the addition of at least another 200 apartments?
So it's separate. The apartments are not what's included here. Our state aid is based on the current enrollment. It's not based on future apartments. It's based on what's called the October 15th report, what our enrollment is that day, plus our special education and transportation is what determines our state aid. Now, I will tell you that I am very vocal in the county and at the state level. I'm going to be testifying, as a matter of fact, in the state to talk about school funding. Districts like Nutley, I do not believe are funded fairly compared to similar districts, and we are continuing to advocate for that, but it won't have any impact on this budget.
So potentially another 200 apartments could tax this next budget, potentially.
It depends. Again, Mr. Moore, we've talked about development. Development is only one of many things that impact a budget. Unless 200 new kids move in, I don't believe that those apartments are going to impact this year's budget. Remember, this is just 1920, and these are fixed costs. This is all I've got. May 8th is it, so it doesn't matter what happens May 9th.
Thank you.
I just, hold on one second, Mr. Chimento. Just, Mr. Moore, as you know, when we're in the middle of negotiations, we cannot disclose percentages or anything like that. However, yes, I just want to add to that, which I think is going to satisfy your answer you were looking for.
No. My question, Tom Evans is doing 5% on the municipality. It's going to do. You're potentially at 4%. We don't know what that number is, and I understand the disclosure factor. But that could send the budget into a tailspin before we even start. And I'm asking, is that potentially factored in?
Yes, it is. We have to. If we don't factor in those pieces, right, we are in mediation, we are having conversations. So we try to make sure when we're building this budget that we account for what potential increases will look like in the upcoming budget year. So it's not that we haven't included any of that in there. Our goal is to make sure that the budget can accommodate those increases as well. And who else had a question? Now we have Mr. Chimento.
No one ever done it. You just made it pretty good.
Wait, Mr. Schmidl, louder.
You can't hear me?
No,
Then I'll go to my coaching voice.
There you go.
Thank you.
My understanding that the administrator just got a large raise, is that correct? Not too long ago? No?
I was going to say, what's your definition of
It was like
a
a 14% raise not too long ago?
That is not correct.
Within the last year?
You were not correct.
I'm not correct.
You were not correct.
Oh.
And the contract is available to.
No, I was
So,
just under that assumption that I heard wrong.
okay, well, I hope that we clarified that that is not correct.
So they did not get that back?
They did not.
Because we tried to, they did with teachers, the Indians on there,
Correct, they did not.
and the chiefs still.
Thank you. Would you like to be heard on the budget?
Under the pie chart, under sports and athletics, I can see a percentage there.
Mr. Momora, was there a percentage that was allocated to the athletics? Because I did see in there that that was the one that did not have a percentage. Can you actually?
Karen's looking at it. We were trying to enlarge it, I think exactly what it was.
No, it's because they tried to make it bigger, it got hidden.
Enlarged.
You click on it, it should go. Karen, you're just gonna have to say it for your statement.
Can you use something else?
I have to. I don't remember.
And it just disappeared.
It looked like the number was 1.34 and confirmed.
It's surprising.
See, my eyes are still good for 6.
So, there you go, good catch. One of the things that I think, and Karen, you can take the microphone back if you want, but the reason we do this chart is because I think it's always surprising to people, you know, that if athletics is 1.34 and teaching and technology supplies is 1.9, those are small pieces of the budget, and yet they always bear the cuts. You heard the kind of cuts we were making. You look at educational administrative software, not even 1% cuts. Professional development, barely 0.12%. Those are the places we're making cuts. Textbooks, not even 0.5%. Unfortunately, the places that are not controlled, such as benefits, pension and benefits, those are the reasons why I go and advocate at the county and the state to talk about a change in formula. We can't control that, and those expenses obviously are the bigger part of our budget.
Any other questions on the budget? Okay, we're going to move to our next presentation, which is our legal person, Mr. Mark Zittimer, and he's going to be doing a presentation on ethics. Good evening, everybody. Powerful microphone. Members of the board, members of the administration, members of the community, my name is Mark Zittimer. I'm the attorney for the Board of Education. I appreciate you having me here this evening to talk about the School Ethics Act. New Jersey law requires that the board annually discuss the School Ethics Act at an annual meeting, so we'll satisfy that requirement. My presentation is interactive at the end. I do a little quiz, not to put anybody on the spot, but I try to test your knowledge a little bit because some of these cases that come down from the School Ethics Commission, the results might surprise you a little bit. So I kind of want to get your views on how you think the School Ethics Commission would decide on some of these cases. So let's jump into it. In New Jersey, the conduct of Board of Education members and school administrators is governed by the New Jersey School Ethics Act. And in the preamble to the School Ethics Act, it says that in our representative form of government, it's essential that the conduct of members of local boards of education and local administrators hold the respect and the confidence of the people. Officials must avoid conduct which is in violation of the public trust or which creates some justifiable impression among the public that such trust is being violated.
And what does that mean? It means board members and school administrators not only have to avoid actual conflicts of interest, but you have to avoid what's called the appearance of impropriety. And I always tell board members, if something doesn't pass the smell test, if somebody's going to question why you voted on a particular issue and it really wasn't in the best interest of the Nutley School District, but you were voting a particular way because it would benefit you personally or financially, or a business that you're involved with, or a family friend, or your own kid in an individual way, it's something you should abstain on. You should recuse yourself from that particular course of action. And that's the whole point of the School Ethics Act. So I mentioned before, the School Ethics Act applies to board members. It applies to employees or officers of the New Jersey School Boards Association, as well as school administrators. Now, within the School Ethics Act, I just handed out to all the board members, is the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics is, again, embodied in the School Ethics Act, but that only applies to board members. It does not apply to school administrators. So the School Ethics Act is essentially broken down into two parts. You have part one, which is the prohibited acts, and that deals with conflicts of interest. Things like board members should not vote on matters where they have a direct or indirect financial or personal involvement that might somehow impair their objectivity. And then again, Section 2 of the Act deals with the Code of Ethics. And I'm going to talk about some of the pertinent code provisions. I don't mean to suggest that they're not all pertinent, they all are, and that's why I handed them out to everybody. But I want to talk about some of the sections where sometimes board members, not Nutley of course, but sometimes board members get themselves in a little bit of trouble. So let's talk about some of the pertinent provisions. We've got Section D, which says that board members are going to carry out their responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with your fellow board members to see that they are well run. The Board of Education hires an administrative team. We've got Dr. Glazer, Ms. Yeamans, and their team of administrators. They are responsible for the day-to-day operations running of the Nutley School District. That is absolutely not a Board of Education responsibility. The board's job is to make sure that the schools are well run through the work of the administration. So what is the role of a Board of Education member? Policy making, planning, and appraisal. Setting policy for the district, planning for the future of the district. We talked about the budget tonight. The board certainly has a vote on the budget. They have input into the budget. That's part of their planning process. And appraisal, taking a step back and saying, how are we doing? What can we do better as a Board of Education? Section E, you recognize that your authority rests with the Board of Education, and you will not make personal promises or take private action that could compromise the Board of Education. You have authority to act as a Board of Education at the dais, at a duly convened meeting, during your various committees, but once you step out onto the streets of Nutley, you don't have authority as a board member to act on behalf of the Board of Education. You shouldn't be making promises, you shouldn't be committing the Board of Education to things without, again, getting the blessing of the majority of the Board of Education. Section G, an extremely important point. You have to hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools. You're going to, as a board member, come upon a lot of confidential information, litigation matters, student matters, personnel matters. The Code of Ethics requires you to keep those things confidential. The law does allow us to discuss certain matters in executive or closed session. We pass a resolution, we tell the public why we're going into closed session, and those topics must remain in closed session. Your family members, your friends, they are not bound by the Code of Ethics. They don't have an obligation to keep this stuff confidential. You do. And I always tell my Board of Education clients, once the Board of Education feels that what is being said in closed session does not stay in closed session, it completely impedes the work of the Board of Education. You're not going to feel confident that what's discussed is going to stay in that room, and you're not going to be able to get anything done, essentially. So I can't stress enough how important it is, the confidentiality piece, and keeping what you discuss in closed session in that room, and it is a serious ethics violation if it is leaked out. Section I, supporting and protecting school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. That does not mean the board has to rubber stamp the administration's recommendations. You're allowed to obviously ask good questions, give your opinions and so forth, but at the end of the day, you're not allowed to evaluate your staff members and your administrators in public. The public itself can certainly weigh in and comment on staff, but board members should not be evaluating their administrators or other staff members in the public forum. And Section J, referring all complaints to the chief school administrator. I always tell board members, this is a great opportunity for board members to punt. You're in a local supermarket, a member of the community comes up to you with a complaint or a concern, you hear what they have to say, but ultimately what you're supposed to do with that complaint is you're supposed to refer to Dr. Glazer, and she is the one who's supposed to be resolving and addressing the complaint, not the board members. So you can certainly follow up with Dr. Glazer and say, hey, did Mr. Smith come up to you and approach you with a concern? And was it handled? So that's absolutely within your right as a board member, but you yourself should not be addressing the complaints. So who can file a complaint? If somebody believes that a Board of Education member violated the ethics provisions, who can file a complaint? The answer is any person can file a complaint alleging a violation of the Act or the Code. The Board of Education as an entity cannot file a complaint, but individual members can do so. And there's a 6-month statute of limitations, which means the complaint has to be filed within 6 months of the time that the person knew or should have known about the violation. The School Ethics Commission is the agency, as part of the Department of Education. They are responsible for enforcing the School Ethics Act. They are the only entity that can determine whether somebody's conduct violated the Act or not. I can certainly give my opinion, but at the end of the day, it's the School Ethics Commission that's going to be the final arbiter about whether something was ethical or not. And if you ever have a question, you can certainly ask me as board counsel about whether you think you should engage in a particular course of conduct, or you can write to the School Ethics Commission and request an advisory opinion. They will give you a written decision about what you're asking an opinion about, and they'll tell you, hey, you should do it or you should not do it. You can even request an advisory opinion about the conduct of another board member. The only caveat is that you have to copy that other board member on your request so that the other board member can weigh in. And again, the School Ethics Commission will issue an advisory opinion. Their opinions, most of them are published. If you go to the New Jersey Department of Education website, you'll see lots and lots of advisory opinions from the School Ethics Commission on questions that board members over the course of years have asked them. So what are the sanctions for violating the School Ethics Act? At the lightest end, you have a reprimand. It's usually a private letter from the School Ethics Commission to the board member saying, hey, you shouldn't have done that. Sorry. The next offense, or penalty I should say, is a censure. That is a resolution read at a public meeting saying that the board member violated the School Ethics Act. A suspension from the Board of Education, or lastly, in the most egregious cases, removal. Can you file an ethics complaint against somebody who's not on the Board of Education anymore? What do you think? The answer is yes, so long as it's within that 6-month statute of limitations. Obviously, the penalty of removal is not going to be an option at that point. Board member free speech issues. I always get the question, what can board members say? And the answer is just because you're a board member doesn't mean you lose your First Amendment rights to give your opinion on a variety of issues, including issues that affect the school district. There are some caveats, though, and I spoke about them before. You're not allowed to disclose information which is inaccurate. That's per the Code of Ethics. So you can give your opinion. You can say that I'm not supporting this budget, or I am supporting this budget, but you can't say I'm not supporting this budget because Dr. Glazer is proposing that we add 100 administrators to the budget. That would not be accurate, so it would be unethical. You can't disclose confidential information, mentioned that before, or information that has the potential to compromise the board. Obviously, that's a very fact-sensitive determination that the School Ethics Commission would make. Board members should also not publicly criticize staff members. That's not protected speech under the School Ethics Act. And we talked about the fact that under the School Ethics Code, you're supposed to support and protect school personnel. Members should not represent your personal opinion as the position of the board, and when you write a letter to the editor, when you post on social media or use Twitter or whatever it is, you have to say that I am a member of the Board of Education. This is my own personal individual opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Board of Education. And again, that your opinion is your own opinion and that it does not necessarily represent the opinion of the Board of Education. So again, board members are getting themselves these days in lots of trouble by posting on Facebook and social media about issues and perhaps giving the community the mistaken impression that they're speaking for the Board of Education. So that's why it's important that you have this disclaimer on any type of communication that you have. Let's do a little quiz here. Number 1. It's a violation of the School Ethics Act for a board member to also serve as an executive officer of the PTA or any PTA executive officer position. What do you think? Can a board member also serve as an executive officer of the PTA? True or false? Just yell it out, or I'll call on you. True. The answer is it's actually not true. you can serve as a board member and executive board member of the PTA. So there's been lots of cases from the School Ethics Commission lately about board members volunteering. And can board members volunteer in other capacities? And what the School Ethics Commission holds that it really boils down to is this. If in your volunteer capacity you're going to have a lot of interaction with staff, giving direction to staff members, then it's a problem. But going into a classroom and reading a book to the kids or participating in a local car wash, again, as long as you don't have a lot of significant interaction with the staff, it's okay, that you can also volunteer in other capacities. How about this one? These are, by the way, in the bottom left corner you'll see citations there. So A06-18 refers to an advisory opinion that was issued from the School Ethics Commission in 2018. You can go to the DOE's website and read more about these cases. But what do you think about this one? A board member whose father is the varsity golf coach and whose mother is the school nurse cannot participate in the evaluations, personnel actions, and/or decisions regarding individuals who are in the direct reporting relationship to the member's parents, up to including the superintendent. So this particular case, the board member's father was a coach, mother was a nurse. Can that Board of Education member participate in the evaluations of all the folks in the chain of command, all the way up to the superintendent of schools? What do you think? Is it a true or is it a false?
True.
It is a true, very good. There is a conflict of interest, and the board member should not participate in any of those discussions. Number 3, a back and forth email discussion between 4 members of the 9-member board regarding the technology committee. Could that constitute a meeting under the Open Public Meetings Act, which would have to be advertised to the public? What do you think about that? A 4-way communication by email between board members.
4 is okay, so why don't we say true or false on that?
So you think it's false, is what you're saying? You're right, it is false. But I would say that 5 members, a quorum, could be it was a trick question, very good. 5 members, it could be an issue. And I always warn board members, be careful about using the email, be careful about replying to all, because you don't want the community to say, hey, we were shut out of these discussions. We had a right to deliberate, or watch your deliberations and participate. Does the board, by the way, have to have public participation at every board meeting? What do you think? Does the law require that? I saw a nod. I like the nod. The answer is you're correct. The board by law has to have 1 public participation session at every meeting. Some boards have 2 on agenda items and then everything else. I think you do that here, right? But the law only requires you to have 1. How about this one, number 4? A board member who's currently a member of the NJAA in another district. So a board member, say, who's a teacher in Newark, for instance, can vote on the final contract with the local association once there's a memorandum of agreement and salary guides that have been developed. So if you're a teacher in Newark, is this a true? Can you participate in the Nutley teachers agreement discussions once there's an MOA with guides? What do you think?
False.
False? Anybody think true? Somebody said true. The answer is true. Once there's an MOA with guides who are allowed to participate in the discussions and ultimately vote, but not before that time. Number 5, a board member with a relative. So I should have talked about this before. Under the School Ethics Act, the Act distinguishes between immediate family members, spouses, children who live in your home, those are immediate family members, and relatives. A sister, for instance, that's a relative under the School Ethics Act. An emancipated child is a relative, believe it or not. They're not an immediate family member anymore. So what about this one? A board member with a sister, for instance, in the NJA in another district may fully participate in negotiations unless the relative is a leader in the district's union affiliate or member of the negotiations team for that union. So if your sister is in another district as a teacher, can you participate in this scenario? What do you think? The answer is true, so you can fully participate, but if your sister in Newark is the head of the teachers union or the head of the negotiations team, they say you need to recuse yourself. It's too close, too much proximity there. How about number 6, rice notices? A rice notice is a situation where we let a community member, a staff member know that the Board of Education may discuss matters pertaining to the terms and conditions of their employment at a board meeting. It's supposed to be given in advance to the staff member, and the staff member, if they get that notice, has a right to compel the discussion into public. Ordinarily, it would take place in private. The rice notice allows the staff member to compel that discussion into public. So can board members rice staff members? What do you think?
No.
The answer is true. Individual board members cannot issue rice notices. Rather, the authority lies with the entire board. If the board wants somebody riced, we can certainly request that of Dr. Glazer. Dr. Glazer can certainly rice folks. And in terms of the superintendent, the board president does have the authority just to rice the superintendent of schools. This is an actual case where a board member decided he was going to rice a bunch of staff members in his district, and it was found obviously to be a violation of the Ethics Act. Just a couple more. I know you've got a meeting to get on with here. Number 7. A board member would violate the code of ethics for board members by actively participating in initial interviews for staff members. So, should board members be participating in interviews of staff members? What do you think? The answer is, it would be a violation. The School Ethics Commission holds the board member should not be participating in initial interviews of staff members, that is an administrative function. Just like exit interviews, that's an administrative function. Ultimately, the superintendent has responsibility for recommending personnel. The board votes on it, but you should not be actually sitting in on those interviews. Is it okay to have a meet and greet once the superintendent has selected a finalist to come before the Board of Education, shake a hand, answer a few questions? Yes, that's fine. But what I'm talking about here is actual interviews. That's an administrative function. Did I answer your question? You did. Okay, good. Number 8, a Board of Education which has 6 out of 8 members who are conflicted. This is a situation where a board member actually stepped down, so they were down to 8 in this particular case. But what about a situation where 6 out of 8 members are conflicted? Can the board invoke the doctrine of necessity to allow everybody to vote? Is that a true or false?
Yeah,
True. So the doctrine of necessity says that if a majority have conflicts, everybody gets to vote. You announce to the public we're invoking this doctrine of necessity. We send the resolution to the School Ethics Commission, and then everybody gets to vote. Last question. It was actually a case that I was involved with in one of my districts where a high school senior actually got elected to the Board of Education, believe it or not. He was a senior, he got elected to the board, and they said to me, Mark, can he vote on his teachers? Can he vote on student matters? What can he vote on? And my head started spinning. I said, this one is really unique. I've never had this one before. And I recommended to the board, let's get an advisory opinion, because it was a really challenging question. And what do you think? Can the student participate in personnel discussions in student matters? No? You say false? I hear a bunch of answers. The answer was true. I was surprised by this one. I thought for sure they were going to say, nope, he's got to recuse himself on pretty much everything. But they said, look, the same limitations apply to that board member that would apply, for instance, to a board member who's got a child in the district. Same limitations. I would certainly recommend that if the Board of Education, for instance, was voting on an increment withholding for his particular teacher, that he should abstain and step away from that. But overall, they said it was really not a violation overall to participate generally in personnel and student matter discussions. Questions? All right, before I take community, let me just make sure the board doesn't have any questions. Anybody from the board? Okay. Sir?
Tonight you went into executive session.
Yes.
You did not announce what the topic was.
We did.
You said...
He said, the board president said we were going into closed session to discuss matters of attorney-client privilege.
What was I'm not asking for this.
Then when we came out, he explained to the community that the discussion had to do with the speakerphone issue.
Why didn't you announce that it was a topic of the speakerphone, not including the topic?
Because all we had to do was announce that it was attorney-client privileged communication, and then when we came out, we announced that it was for that particular topic.
Now, this evening, there was an indication that you sent an email out in 2 cases, and you emailed it to all the board members. I'd like to get a copy of those 2 cases.
That is an attorney-client privilege communication between me and the board. The Board of Education has the right to waive that privilege. I, as the attorney, don't have the right to waive that privilege. So if the board decides they want to issue my opinion to the community, which I would advise against, that's their prerogative, but I can't waive the privilege.
And I'll open it.
You're not going to get it under Oprah anyway, because the same restriction applies. Under Oprah, there are exceptions. So under Oprah, you can file a request, certainly, but you can't produce student records. You can't produce...
You asked me student records.
I'm giving examples. Okay.
Okay, it's a case. And when you came out and you said that the topic was, eventually you're going to have to release the topic of the special meeting, minute meetings to the public. And in there, you should have the 2 cases.
I'm happy to share with the cases. Is that all you're asking? You want to know the cases that were cited?
I just wanted 2 cases.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. One of the cases was Romeo versus Old. I misunderstood your question. The name of the cases that I rely on, which are public records, are Koch versus Jackson, and the other one is Romeo versus the Old Bridge Board of Education. And there's also an attorney ethics, an attorney general's advisory opinion on board member participation by speakerphone. So Koch versus Jackson, Romeo versus Old Bridge, and then the Attorney General opinion. I think it's from 2002.
Then I can get those open.
You could go on. You can go on Google and find them. Anything else?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Zimmerman. We're going to have the board come back up to the stage, and we will continue with our meeting. Thank you. Okay, there's no president's report this evening. We're going to go over, Dr. G, do you have a superintendent's report? Okay.
For the sake of time, I'm not going to do my full report, but I do think it bears mentioning that in the last couple weeks we've had our students put on a tremendous performance of Newsies, and they had to do that out of their home space at the high school auditorium and still did the most tremendous job. It was wonderful. We've had our winter guard compete on the national level and do, I think they placed 7th on the national level, and the first time with them competing. Pretty amazing. Over the last couple days, we've had the Third Half Club run their March Madness, which was a lot of fun, I think, for all of our students at the elementary level, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I know I had fun when I attended. And also on Saturday, our Academic Boosters Club just had the most tremendous lift in participation for our science fair. I loved listening to the kids. I think, how many kindergartens, Lisa, do we have participate?
We had 23 projects.
23 kindergarten projects. That's tremendous, huge number of kids. And I know, I don't know where Mr. Baby went. I was going to ask him to tell me about the 5th or 6th grader who talked about composting that just blew him away. So we were really impressed with all of our students. The Academic Boosters Club does have a list of award winners, and then they give their awards later at the Nutley Museum. We'll let you know what that date is, so we can further honor our students. I'll save everything else until next month. You'll just get a long list of all of the accolades and things we're proud of next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Glazer. Our student representative is not in attendance this evening, so we're going to go over to our committee reports. We're going to start off with Lisa Danchek-Martin with academic.
Thank you, Mr. President. K through 12 Science Coordinator Carly Johnson presented the program review and recommendations for science. This will be presented publicly at the April Board of Education meeting. K through 12 Health and PE Coordinator Ms. Powell presented the program review and recommendations for health and PE. This will also be presented at the April Board of Education meeting. Mr. Vanya reviewed a draft of the middle school program of studies for 2019-2020, including details of all the changes from last year. Ms. Loconsolo shared the planned annual dyslexia training for April, including a parent workshop on Tuesday, April 9th at 7 p.m. at Washington School. And I hear pizza will be served.
Pizza will be served.
So anyone interested is welcome to attend. Mr. Vanya, Ms. Loconsolo provided an update on the plan change of teacher websites and the implementation of a learning management system. Schoolology. Mr. Van, you reviewed the field trips and professional development requests, and Dr. Glazer reviewed the updated budget and also personnel and legal updates. Our next meeting will be held on Wednesday, April 17th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nanchek-Martin. We're going to move on over to Finance, Mr. Ferrara.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee met on March 12th. Mrs. Yeamans and Mr. Memore reviewed tonight's finance resolutions, including the budgetary transfers. Dr. Glazer and Mrs. Yeamans presented the tentative 2019 and 2020 budget, including the final revenues reflective of state aid and proposed appropriation reduction and/or cuts. Mr. Banya and Mrs. Lopez-Colo provided additional rationale and the educational impact of specific reductions. Our next meeting is set for Tuesday, April 23rd.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrara. Policy Committee. That's actually, I'm the chair of that committee. Dr. Glazer reviewed other district policies for athletic code of conduct as related to hazing. Mr. Pyron and Mr. Williams will join us at the next meeting to develop. Mr. Veenmeister highlighted the folder on our Google Team Drive with numerous general policies to be updated. The committee will review the first ones for the next meeting, and this will be on the April agenda for the first reading. Next meeting for the policy will be on Wednesday, April 17, 2019. Also being on that chair, just let the public know, I wanted to thank Mr. Zittimer for his opinion, and I will certainly be bringing up the policy for members to be able to vote by phone. And so we will start that review with the anticipation that we'll have it up for a first reading in the next meeting or the meeting following. We now come to the portion of our meeting where we allow members of the public to address the board. In this section, we allow questions or comments on only resolutions addressed in tonight's agenda. Our board regulation 601 allot 20 minutes for these communications. Each person shall be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask you to try to stay within this requirement. Speakers may speak more than once, only after others wishing to speak on a topic have been heard. All statements will be directed to me as the chairperson, and no one may address board members individually. Please be reminded that if your statement is too lengthy, abusive, obscene, irrelevant, or redundant, your participation may be terminated. Please remember to always state your name and address each and every time you address the board, and sign in with Mr. Capuzzo before you take the microphone.
Mr. Moore, can you sign? You did it right. Did you sign?
Did you sign in, Mr. Moore?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yep. Thank you.
Roy Moore, 462 Chestnut Street.
Can you hear me now? Rory Moore, 463 Chestnut Street. Mr. President, I have 2 questions on your bills. The first is page 1, and it's actually for Light Path. You have 2 payments to Light Path for about $4,000 or $5,000. What's that for? Cablevision Light Path Incorporated.
That's our internet connectivity payment. So, like you have a Wi-Fi bill at home for your internet service, this is for our...
Is that per month or is that an annual?
Per month.
That's per month? Mm-hmm. You have 2 separate ones?
And then we have actual, a bill for cable channels that are used in the classrooms.
And you also have, my other question is, I see cell phones, you've got 4 of them on that same page. In the middle, there's an AT&T, for about $275, and on your page 5 of 6 is 3 more. There's Verizon Wireless, and there's another Verizon Wireless. Why is the cell phone bill so high?
The cell phone bill is actually lower than it was about 3 years ago, as we have controlled the number of individuals that have cell phones and the type of plans that they have. But our entire, all the head custodians have a cell phone. All the bus drivers and the aides have cell phones so that they can stay connected to the parents and the district. We have some administrators that have phones, but not everyone has access to a cell phone.
Why are they, I guess, you have 3 different accounts, apparently. That's what it looks like. Why aren't they consolidated to one account for simplicity's sake?
It's 3 different budgetary lines where we charge those services to. So the cell phones that are used by the after-school program for extended day are budgeted to the extended day account, not through the district's general fund account.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to be heard?
My name is Alexander D'Antonio. I live at...
Did you sign in, Mr. D'Antonio? I'm sorry, the sign-in sheet is right here. Thank you.
I have some concerns about the sports program that just happened to my son last week.
Okay, Mr. D'Antonio, does it have to do with, does it?
I'll bring it to your attention.
Yeah, but
What's
there's
going
a,
on, and I would
I
like some
realize,
answers at a later date.
okay. If you just give me 1 second to explain that there's 2 moments that you get to speak and address the board. All I wanted to ask you is what you want to say, is it related to the resolutions that we're going to move?
No, it's not.
Okay, so then I'm going to ask you to just allow us to move these resolutions, and then I will actually, at the next part, you'll be able to come up on all school matters, and then you'll be able to make a statement to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to be heard on resolutions only for this evening? Seeing none, can we have Lisa Dancheck Martin, please, academic?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to move academic resolutions 1 through 3 as written.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call. Mr. Memorial?
Mrs. Dancheck Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Ferraro?
Yes.
Mrs. Court?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Sclera?
Yes.
Ms. Sarah? Mr. Carmesella?
Yes. Mr. Sclera, would you take administration, please?
Yes, Mr. President, I move administration resolutions 1 through 3 as written.
Second.
Discussion?
Mr. President, can we just have and I know it might be sensitive, but an explanation as to the amendment to the memorandum of agreement with law enforcement?
So every year, we're required to update that memorandum, add any new staff members to it, and have it signed off on by myself and by Chief Strumlow for the township and submitted to the county. There were no changes this year. Mr. Ferrero remains the liaison for the district with the police department, and we had already implemented any of the other required state changes, the streaming video, the shared cameras. There was one other one, but we had already done that. So our amendment is only the yearly update.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Roll call, Mr. Memorial?
Mrs. Dancheck Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Ferraro?
Yes.
Mrs. Court?
Page 6.
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Sclera?
Yes.
Ms. Sarah?
Yes.
Mr. Carmesella?
Yes. Mr. Ferrero, would you move finance resolutions, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Motion to move finance resolutions 1 through 14.
All right, before we start the discussion, I just want to just state on number 13, which is the approval of the tentative budget. What we are seeing here is set at a 3% tax levy. Okay, this is preliminary. So with that, that's my discussion. Anyone else have any further discussion that they would like to add?
That was my only question. It's configured at 3%.
That is correct. And am I correct in saying that, Mrs. Yates? Okay. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. President. Number 14, with the 2019-20 budget for district travel maximum. I know this is statutory, but is the amount based on a statutory figure, or is that based on, last year's numbers?
Attorney Michael. It is not a statutory number, it is a number that the district has, so that our appropriations are under that number. That's a number that we cannot, that we've determined that we would not exceed by.
So that's just a not to exceed number?
It's just a not to exceed, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Roll call, Mr. Memore?
Mrs. Danchek-Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Ferraro?
Yes 1 through 12, no on 13, yes to 14.
Mrs. Quirk?
Yes to all except number 13, that's no.
Mr. Riley?
Yes on all except 13. I'm voting no on number 13.
Mr. Scalera?
Yes, on all.
Ms. Sarah?
Yes to all except no to 13.
Mr. Carnicello?
I am a yes to all. I did not carry.
Make another motion.
So
So the motion on the tentative budget did not pass. The vote was 4 noes, 3 yeses. So if anybody would like, they can make a new motion at a different percent. I presume that was the issue.
I have a question. If we don't come up and resolve that tonight, what is the failure of not reporting anything to the state?
You know, I've had this happen in one other district where the county superintendent jumps in and decides what the budget should be, which you never want to happen. You'd like to exercise that authority yourselves rather than giving it up to somebody else.
County executives were approved, he was a former superintendent.
Just for full disclosure, our county superintendent is recused from Nutley. He's the former Nutley superintendent. We've been assigned Mr. Juan Torres, who is the executive county superintendent in Huntington.
Is there anyone wishing to put forward a separate resolution for the passage of this budget?
At this point, if I'm correct, without the intervention of the superintendent, or the county super, this budget would be restricted to just 2% or 0? Like, what's the process at this point?
You know, the county superintendent would look at the big picture and determine presumably what he or she felt the right amount was. I don't know exactly how they would come to their determination, so I'm not positive.
Okay, so is there anyone wishing to put forward a different resolution? If that is no, the next step at this point would be to contact the county super, and we will take guidance from them.
One thing, hold on, Sal.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to stay within the 2% cap.
We need a second.
Second.
Okay, we're going to do a roll call. We need a discussion. Anyone have any discussion on this topic? I'm going to make a statement. I was in favor of 3%, understanding that we have some significant constraints that face this district, and it's an ongoing concern. If you look at the projections long-term of where our budget numbers are going to continue to fall, we will continue to face challenges, which is not abnormal for other districts. I felt in my own belief that a 3% would have certainly kept everyone accountable, would have definitely forced us as a district and as board members to really take a hard look at our budget and spending and make sure that we were able to deliver education, be able to support the influx of special education students, and just give us some leverage as we go into the next year of the budgeting process. With that, I will leave it to the rest of the board to decide the outcome of the 2%, and I'll open it up to anybody else who has any discussion.
So, I guess, so before we take the vote, I just want to make a statement. So I supported the 3%. I have to be honest, I would probably support the 4% because we do the right thing for the school district. I would be voting no on either resolution tonight. I'd rather let the county administrator give us a decision over me passing something to her to vote tonight. So I'm no on anything besides at least 3% amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Scalera. Anyone else like to add to the discussion?
Yeah, I have a question. So what are, the other two board members are not here.
Correct.
When are they supposed to be back in Nutley? Are they supposed to be back before we have to present it to the county? Can we have an emergency meeting, table this?
I don't
and
know
then
when they'll be
have
back,
them-
but it's due to the county Wednesday morning. It's due to the county.
So we will not have enough time to facilitate a special meeting. So at this point, any other further discussion, and we will put this to vote. Roll call, Mr. Gilmore.
Mrs. Dancheck Martin?
No, I don't vote for 2%. I think that we would really undercut our students' education at 2%. We would lose too many teachers and staff members, and I don't think the district could operate with that. So no.
Mr. Ferraro?
Yes to 2%?
Mrs. Quirk?
Yes to 2%.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Scalera?
No.
Ms. Sarah?
Yes.
Mr. Carnicella?
No.
Motion carried.
Okay, let's see who we have here. Ms. Quirk, would you move personnel, please?
I'd like to move personnel agenda, resolution 1 as written.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, Mr. Memore.
Mrs. Dancheck Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Ferraro?
Yes.
Mrs. Quirk?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Scalera?
Yes.
Ms. Sarah?
Yes.
Mr. Carnicella?
Yes. Okay, in this section, we allow questions or comments on all school-related matters. Our regulation allot 30 minutes for these communications. Again, each person shall be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask you to try to stay within this requirement. As I stated earlier, all statements will be directed to me as the chairperson, no one may address the board members individually. Please be reminded that if your statement is too lengthy, abusive, obscene, irrelevant, or redundant, your participation may be terminated. Please remember to always state your name and address each and every time you address the board, and sign this conclusion before you take the microphone. Will the first person wishing to be heard please step forward? And I see that Mr. Rory Moore is there.
Rory Moore, 462 Chestnut Street. Mr. President, did you pass for 2%?
The 2% was passed.
It was passed.
As a preliminary budget, correct.
So if I understand it, you're basically set at 2%?
That is correct.
That is correct. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much for doing that. The first time I ever saw a board of education that only act on the board. Secondly, tonight you were trying to do a call-in, and I understand that there's no policy set for that. Now, why aren't you allowing call-in for people who cannot attend, especially handicapped people? Is there a reason that you just want the people to vote?
And are you referring to the fact for the public participation portion of the meeting? Like to have like a live meeting?
You can go either way, I would think, because you just want to have somebody, you want Charlie to call it the vote so you could have got 3% tonight, obviously. You want to do that again, but why can't the public have the same right, especially disabled people?
And I was going to say, if there is a policy that supports, we would definitely have a conversation about it to see how we can draft such a policy. I just want to make sure that we're clear. You're talking about the ability for someone to be able to call in a question, or I'm talking about the public, right? We understand that we can create a policy for the board.
Your policy is to allow elected officials to call in and participate in the meeting with the intent to vote. Then you have to sit here and think about, well, what about the public? As an example, let's say Facebook Live, because it already exists, the technology is already there. And I could say, I could watch a Facebook Live right now and say, I want a question. I could type it in. The public should have the same ability and the same right to be able to listen to this meeting live and be able to make some kind of a comment if they so desire. I hope that you're not trying to eliminate it where just the board members can vote only.
But we can't eliminate anything that we don't have yet. So we haven't.
Say that.
Yeah, so and so I just want to make sure that we're clear on what we're requesting, is that as we develop and review a potential policy that allows the public official that sits on this board to be interactive in this meeting off-site, right? Okay. That there is some form of policy that would allow the public participation to follow a similar suit.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I do believe, if I understood the town attorney, he said that under the Open Public Meetings Act in New Jersey, that is allowable. But I don't think it discriminates to say it's just elected officials versus the public. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else wishing to be heard? Mr. D'Antonio, this would be that moment where we can come on up. Thank you.
Alex D'Antonio, 609 Bloomfield Avenue. I hope that comes true, and I can stay home, keep my leg off. As you know, in 1972, I lost my leg playing football for Nutley High School when I was a sophomore. And the reason I'm here is about my son, who was born with 5 heart defects and had open heart surgery. And he's a miracle child, and thank God he's playing sports in Nutley High. Well, I have 3 questions about the baseball that just happened. First, I felt that tryouts were unfair because the weather was inclement, and they only had 3 tryouts, and they were in the gym. Okay? And then the next and first and only outside tryout, they had a scrimmage against St. Benedict's last Monday. My son played 3 innings, got 2 ground balls thrown to the cutoff man, and was up once and struck out. After the game, they went back to the high school. My son and another boy were called into the coach's office, and Mr. Harbison told them they were cut. The thing I don't understand about that, besides being unfair, because they really didn't have much time to practice outside. Plus, he played last year as a sophomore. He started on JV in left field, and Mr. Harbison brought him up to the varsity about 4 or 5 games because he was fast and he was a good pinch runner, which he scored a few runs, and one was in the GNT finals against Livingston in the first inning. And his picture and a caption with his name in it is on NJ.com still. I have proof of that on my phone if anybody wants to see it. And the other thing is, for the last month or 2, he's been very upset and depressed. And I received a phone call from the principal of the high school last week, and I was on speakerphone with 2 counselors because he was very upset and I didn't know what he was going to do. I think it was more anger that he got cut, and I didn't find out about it until Tuesday because I was working a part-time job Monday night. And he texted me Tuesday from school that he was cut. And for the last 2 months, he's been hearing from friends of his that they were on the team and were going to Florida. Okay, so I don't know how people could have tryouts on the last day, Monday, and 2 boys were cut. And Wednesday morning, about 20, and there's 2 boys that didn't go to Florida that made the team, and all the other ones went to Florida. So less than 48 hours, how could you possibly get reservations or airline tickets? To me, the team was picked before the tryouts, which I think is not fair. I hope you investigate this issue and address it. And the third thing I have is that if the freshman sports were not taken away, my son is a junior, he should be able to play on a JV. He was told that he couldn't play on JV. That's only for freshmen and sophomores now. Any comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was taking notes. I just want to make sure that, so at this point, and then just so that I understand where or who you have spoke to already, have you had any conversations with the athletics director, superintendent, building principal?
I feel that I wouldn't get a fair answer and be told the truth by the athletic director, because when he decided years ago to get rid of the Thanksgiving Day game against Belleville, I started a petition to reinstate the game, and some people in this audience signed it also too. So I don't think he's particularly fond of me.
Okay, so what I will do is this, and Dr. Glazer is here.
I would think that it would be appropriate to just investigate some of this and see what's going on and see if we can get some answers for Mr. D'Antonio.
I just don't see how it's feasibly possible to have these tryouts, and then within 2 days, all these kids are going to Florida. This had to be planned in advance. Sounds like collusion to me.
Well, and like I said, I took notes down here that I can, as well give to Dr. Glazer, just to, if this way we're all clear on the notes. We also can go back to the film to make sure that we didn't miss anything, because this is a recorded meeting. But at this point, I will definitely have an investigation started to just review what has gone up to this point.
I gave a lot to this town, including my leg. I think I should, some of this stuff should be investigated.
Well, and again, yeah, it's going to be investigated, and then once the investigation is complete, what we can provide to you in detail would be given to you. Again, when we do the investigations with administration and staff, some of that stuff is just not available for you or the public. So, but I will tell you that will happen. We will conduct an investigation, and whatever we can share, we will. But just give us an opportunity to do that.
That's fine. I just feel that the team was already picked before the tryouts.
Correct. And
that's the main thing.
Yeah.
And if you still had freshman program, he'd still be able to play JV because he's only a junior.
So I'm just going to correct a little bit of that. The freshman program I know has been, talked about that it's been eliminated. It has not been eliminated, although the way that they set the sports now at 2 levels of play, freshman, sophomore, they can still come out and try out, the same as juniors and seniors. Where they align in the program does change. So, if someone is playing at the JV level and is a junior, they would not have the opportunity to play, or in level 2, they would not have the opportunity to play at level 1, because level 1 is set for freshman and sophomore, level 2 is for juniors and seniors.
My concern is that he started last year on JV as a sophomore, but he can't play this year.
Correct, and like, I'm following it, so.
So Mr. President, and most of that's private, but I just have a question. So is it true, and I don't think it was presented that when we did sports, that a JV person, a junior still can't play on JV? Because that's what he's saying.
But what's happening is JV doesn't exist, it's 2 levels of play. So
Freshman, sophomore.
it's freshman, sophomore.
So I understand now, so there's no JV level.
Correct.
Freshman, sophomore,
Okay, thank you.
Which is unfair.
But we're going to, like I said, Mr. D'Antonio, we will certainly investigate it and then be able to give you whatever information we can, but it will certainly get done.
Thank you.
And I appreciate coming up and explaining to us. Thank you.
Ward 462 Chestnut Street. I just have one quick question. The gentleman just came up here. Now, the attorney's here. Can the athletic coach, can he have an ethics violation put against him? Is he bound by that?
Coaches are not subject to the School Ethics Act.
Oh, they're not, so they can do anything they want.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that, but they're not subject to the School Ethics Act.
So, no bounds whatsoever. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to be heard? Hold on, Mr. D'Antonio.
So if it's a freshman soccer team, freshman or sophomore, on the varsity?
They can. They can play up. They just don't play down.
That's part of the tryouts.
So that's the part that's unfair. We're eliminating it from the program. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it freshman soccer. In my mind, we eliminated freshman sports. But the fact that he's started last year, now he's a junior, there's something wrong with that. I agree with you.
So if they're a junior and they don't make the tryout team, they cannot play.
If they're a junior and they play at that level, and I'm going to say that it's my understanding that they would not. If they're at the junior level and do not play at that varsity level, or have the ability to play at that level, they would not be eligible to play in that sport. Mr. D'Antonio, go ahead.
Aren't some of these coaches also teachers? So wouldn't they be held to the ethics question from Mr. Morgate?
Teachers are also not subject to the School Ethics Act. Board members, school administrators, and folks from the New Jersey School Boards Association are subject to the School Ethics Act. And there's lots of other laws dealing with, we don't condone, of course, unbecoming conduct on the part of any staff member, but it's a different law.
One other thing I want to say is there's been a lot of stuff that's been swept under the Board of Education rug for years now, and it's very lumpy under there. And a lot of you know what I'm talking about. If you have any questions for me, I'll be in order.
Thank you, Mr. D'Antonio.
Ralph Chimento, 74 Mapes Ave. You can dance around this or call it what you want, call it sub-varsity. You got rid of your freshman sports. You do not have a true freshman schedule. So the way I see it, there is no freshman team. There's a sub-varsity team. You speak about doing what's right for the kids. What's right for the kids is to have every level. You didn't get rid of the coaching staff, so it's still in the budget. All right? You should consider some volunteer coaches, maybe a little bit more than you have. You can't get rid of sports, and sooner or later you kind of had to guess this was going to come and bite you in the backside, because there's kids in this town now that can't play sports, and they're juniors. And put yourself in a position as this gentleman's child that they can't play a sport anymore, and now where's that leave them? It leaves them either on video games, or it leaves them in the streets, maybe to pick up bad habits, maybe drugs, maybe something. And if that turns out to be the problem here, shame on you guys for allowing the administrator that makes the decision possible. You need to consider freshman sports, again, next year at every level. If there's a level that doesn't generate enough children to play, then you can eliminate that sport, I get it. But when you have an abundance of kids, you had a freshman team last year, baseball, that won 19 games. They played 19 or 20 games. That told you there's enough kids. Baseball's a big sport in this town. And to eliminate it, that's a year of nurturing a child. That's a year of getting better to make our varsity program better. And to eliminate a sport and dance around it and call it whatever you want, you can say you didn't get rid of it, you did get rid of it. Because there's kids sitting home right now that can't play the sport, that love the sport, they have no outlet, they have nowhere to go. They have nowhere to go. And what kind of money are we saving doing it? We're not saving much money by doing this. So I suggest that this board gets together with the athletic director and reconsiders this whole nightmare that I'm hearing throughout the town. Because it is a nightmare. And this is only one person that came forward. And I'm sure there's a couple more in this audience that didn't come forward. And there's several people in town, maybe hundreds of people in town, that are sick over this. So although you may sit here and not think it's important, it's just as important as having your music program, and your after-school programs, and your art programs, and everything else. It's part of a child's development. It's part of being part of something, of a team. And most of these kids don't even care if they play. They're part of a team, they're part of something. And you really need to consider it. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but I knew this was going to come back to bite you guys in the butt when this came up at that meeting. You can call it what you want, just do it. Get it done, do it right. You talk about making cuts. Make cuts, not these cuts, not sports, not kids.
Thank you.
Hey, Bronco, 69 Ray Street. I was not prepared to talk, and I really don't know what I want to say, but I definitely have to.
I'm sorry, can you just speak into the microphone a little bit louder?
I said I wasn't prepared to talk, but I'm reiterating what Ralph said because it stands so true in my household. I have a broken child who did not get to try out outside as well. He played baseball from the age of 3 or 4, up on 2 teams on some years, up to this level, looking so forward to being on a freshman team with his peers that he's played with all along, who have made the team and he hasn't. And going back to what he said about now coming home from school and sitting on video games or being out on the street. I have to worry about those two things. If he was to be on a sport, not only would he have that family, I mean, we have some stress going on at home with a separation and divorce, so he would have that outlet as a sport, his sport as his outlet. He doesn't have that anymore. It's been taken from him, and he would be a player on a freshman team if there was one, because he wouldn't have been cut at that level. They didn't get to try out outside. He was cut from playing indoors. And I don't know, I really don't even know what I want to say, but I had to get up and back what Mr. Schmento and Mr. D'Antona were saying, because I am dealing with a child at home that's depressed, broken, keeps saying to me, I should be on that field, I should be on that field. It would affect his studies as well, because if he's on the team, he couldn't get a low grade point average because he'd be cut. So to me, it helps me in that level to get him to keep his studies up. He's just broken, and the family's all suffering with him. So I don't know, I had to say something.
No, listen, I thank you for coming to the microphone. I know that's not an easy thing. And can I just ask you, can you just repeat your name for the record? Because it didn't, and if you didn't sign in, just sign it.
I did. Leah Crocco, 69 Ray Street.
Thank you.
Mr. President, if this isn't the right time, let me know and I'll wait. But yeah, maybe we could have our athletic director come back and present some data before the board. This was implemented at the beginning of the year. So, you know, he does have data available, so I think maybe it's a good time now to have him come back and present the data to us on, you know, how the program has worked over the last 4 to 5 months.
I would think that would probably be an appropriate time to say that. Thank you, Sal. So yes, we will work on a presentation for the public. Anyone else wishing to be heard?
Allison D'Antonio, 609 Bloomfield Avenue. One thing, you're talking about data. Children aren't data, they're live and they're real. And these kids need these programs. And the second thing, like you had before that was missing, the school athletic budget is only 1.34%. 1.34%, that's it.
Thank you. Whereas the Board of Education will be discussing matters exempt, only old business to come before the board. Any new business? Whereas the Board of Education will be discussing matters exempt from public discussion pursuant to NJSA 10:4-12, now therefore be resolved that the Board of Education recess to close executive session at this time to discuss legal, personnel, and property acquisition. Be it further resolved that the results of the discussions will be made public by inclusion on the agenda of a subsequent meeting of the Board of Education, and when the reasons for discussing such matters in closed session no longer exist. Could we have a motion to go into closed executive session? All in favor? Thank you.